Have you ever felt someone's absence more loudly than their presence? Like they vanished without a word, but somehow their silence still speaks to you, almost too clearly? Welcome to the Magnetize channel, where we dive deep into life, love, spirituality, and the law of attraction. If you're new here, you're in the right place, especially if you're someone who feels deeply, who senses energy, even when there are no words. Tonight's message is coming through late, not just because the day was busy, but because this particular energy tends to rise up in the quiet hours. This is for someone who's been feeling a strange pull, especially at night. Someone who keeps wondering, why did they leave like that? Was it something I did? Or was it something they couldn't face within themselves? I'm channeling something very specific. The energy of a person who thinks about you when they're alone, when they can't run from their own thoughts anymore. Someone who quietly exited your life without explanation. Maybe it didn't make sense. Maybe everything seemed fine, until it wasn't. If that resonates, stay with me, because the silence you're feeling, it's not just absence, it's energy. And there's more to it than you realize. When the world goes quiet and the lights dim, something mysterious begins to stir in the air. It's more than just silence, it's a sacred stillness, a kind of hush that blankets the earth and pulls your soul inward. Have you ever noticed how thoughts get louder at night? How emotions rise like the tide, crashing in waves against the walls of your mind? This is not random. This is a calling, a frequency only certain souls can hear. In the quiet corners of the night, energy moves differently, deeper, softer, but more intense. It's as if the heart gains a voice and the soul leans in to listen. Why is it that some messages are born only in the dark? Why does longing bloom under the moonlight, like a flower that only opens when the sun is gone? Late-night energy has a particular flavor. It tastes like nostalgia and feels like a forgotten song, playing on repeat in your chest. It's in this space that the speaker emerges, not just to talk, but to channel. This isn't just communication, it's a transmission. A soft, invisible thread connecting one soul to another, like two radio towers blinking in sync across a dark landscape. The message isn't for the many, it's for the few, the rare souls whose hearts are tethered to someone else's thoughts, even across distance and time. If you're reading this and your chest tightens, if you feel like someone is pulling at the invisible strings of your spirit, this might be for you. There are certain emotions that bloom more fully at night: reflection, longing, vulnerability. They ripen under the moonlight, like how flowers close in the day and unfold at dusk. Our true feelings often wait until everything else has quieted before they step into the light. That's when memories walk back into the room uninvited. That's when the what-ifs become loud guests in your head. That's when the person you swore you were over suddenly shows up in your chest like a ghost with unfinished business. The energy that flows at night is heavier, like thick velvet draped over your spirit. But within that weight is a strange kind of clarity, an unfiltered honesty that doesn't show up in the daylight. When the world is asleep, your intuition wakes up. That's why some messages have to be delivered at night, because only then are the spiritual lines clear, uncluttered by noise, distraction, or daylight masks. The speaker taps into this hidden current, carrying a message wrapped in the raw truth of midnight emotions. It's meant for those who feel things more deeply after dark, for those who suddenly remember someone they thought they'd forgotten. For the ones who feel their name being called in the silence, not with sound, but with energy. If you feel it, don't ignore it. That pull in your spirit, that might not be just your own heart speaking. It might be someone else thinking of you, missing you, reaching across the quiet with nothing but longing and a whisper of love. Have you ever stood in a room that once echoed with laughter, only to feel the sudden emptiness when it goes silent? That's what it feels like when someone vanishes without warning. One moment they're there, present, involved, speaking as though tomorrow was promised, and the next they're gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just a vacuum where their presence used to live. It's like watching a candle flicker, expecting it to glow a little longer, and then, without warning, it dies, leaving you in darkness with the scent of what once was. The silence they leave behind isn't quiet, it's thunderous. It roars in the spaces they used to fill. It echoes in your thoughts, bouncing between memories and questions that have no answers. This kind of vanishing acts like an invisible wound, one that doesn't bleed but hurts just the same. It's not just about their absence, it's about the confusion that follows in its wake. You replay conversations, looking for clues. You scan old messages, like archaeologists searching for ancient truth, hoping to uncover a sign, a warning, anything to make sense of the sudden emptiness. But nothing surfaces, just more silence. And that silence, it speaks in riddles. It's a locked door with no key, a mystery that refuses to be solved. Unexplained silence feels like being left mid-sentence, with your mouth open and your heart exposed. It's as if you were dancing with someone, and mid-spin, they let go of your hand and disappeared into the crowd, leaving you turning alone in a rhythm that now feels cruel. The music keeps playing, but the harmony is gone. That abrupt pause forces you to carry questions that grow heavier by the day. Was it something I said? Did I do something wrong? Was any of it real? These thoughts become shadows that trail behind your steps, never quite leaving you alone. What hurts more than the absence is the lack of closure. It's the unfinished story, the unwritten ending, the unanswered why. Human beings are wired to seek resolution, like readers waiting for the last chapter of a gripping novel. But when someone disappears without explanation, they steal that final page and leave you staring at a half-told story, desperate for a conclusion that never arrives. And even if you try to move on, that blank space follows you. It becomes the ghost in the room, the question mark at the end of every memory. There's something deeply human about needing to understand, and when someone we cared for disappears without offering that understanding, it's not just their absence we mourn, it's the connection, the meaning, the shared moments that now feel tainted with uncertainty. It's like building a bridge with someone, only to find they walked off it halfway through, leaving you stranded in the middle, unsure whether to turn back or leap forward into the unknown. Their silence becomes a presence of its own, louder than their words ever were. It whispers in the middle of the night, it lingers in your favorite songs, it stares back at you in places you once shared. You find yourself looking for them in crowds, hoping to catch even a glimpse of closure in a stranger's face. But they're not there. All that's left is that loud, resounding silence, thick like fog, heavy like wet clothes on your skin, unshakable. Yet somehow, despite the ache, despite the questions, you keep breathing, because deep down, You know that while they may have left without explanation, your healing doesn't need their permission. The silence they left behind may echo, but it will not define your worth. And one day, that silence will soften, not because they returned, but because you chose to rise above what they never gave. Fear is a quiet thief. It doesn't always kick down the door with noise, but sometimes tiptoes in unnoticed and rearranges the furniture of the heart. The fear of rejection, especially, is like a shadow that follows you even in the sun, whispering doubts and planting seeds of hesitation where love should grow. For some, it becomes so overwhelming that they choose to vanish before anyone has the chance to push them away. That's what happened here. The individual didn't walk away because they didn't care or because the love offered wasn't enough. No, they retreated like a wave pulled back into the ocean. Not because the shore wasn't beautiful, but because the tide inside them was restless with fear. They believed, perhaps without realizing it, that if they didn't leave first, they would eventually be left. So they pulled away, not as an act of cruelty, but of self-protection. Their mind became a mirror that only reflected the worst possibilities. What if I'm not good enough? What if I open up and they don't stay? What if my truth drives them away? These thoughts stacked like bricks, building a wall between them and the very love they longed for. In a tragic twist, they became their own judge and jury, sentencing themselves to isolation before anyone else had a chance to speak. Like a flower that folds its petals in the dark, they closed themselves off, trying to shield their softness from the cold. But in doing so, they suffocated their chance at connection. This is the paradox of fear. It pretends to protect, but quietly imprisons. And when someone rejects themselves first, they unknowingly rob others of the chance to truly love them. The person on the other side, who came with open hands, who offered a heart full of warmth and words that carried weight, was left standing in silence, holding on to hope like a letter with no address. They gave something real, something brave, and in return, they received an unanswered echo. It wasn't abandonment born of apathy. It was the heartbreak come of being pushed away by someone too afraid to be embraced. Imagine a child reaching out for their parent's hand in the dark, only for the parent to step back, not because they don't love their child, but because they're afraid their grip isn't strong enough to hold. That's the pain of this kind of rejection. It feels like abandonment, but it's really a person wrestling with their own demons behind the scenes. Fear told them they were unworthy, so they bowed out before they could be unchosen. It's like throwing away a winning lottery ticket because you're convinced it's fake. In their mind, they were bracing for a fall that hadn't happened yet, rehearsing pain instead of receiving peace. And so the tragedy unfolds. One person walks away, convinced they were sparing themselves heartbreak, while the other is left heartbroken by a love that never had the chance to breathe. What could have bloomed was buried, not because of hate or hurt, but because fear spoke louder than love. The fear of not being enough led to the decision to be absent altogether. That's the cruel irony. What they were running from, they created. The fear of rejection became a prophecy, fulfilled by their own retreat. And in the end, the real loss wasn't just love. It was the possibility of being fully seen and accepted, flaws and all. The person didn't just reject a relationship, they rejected their own worthiness of connection. And that is perhaps the deepest wound of all. Sometimes emotions arrive like unexpected weather, sunshine one moment, and then, without warning, a storm of sadness or a tide of tension. The one feeling it may pause, confused, wondering, why do I suddenly feel this way? But not every emotion we carry is truly ours. Like radio signals floating through the air, feelings can travel invisibly from one person to another, especially when one heart is wide open and the other is silently bursting at the seams. The person on the receiving end begins to feel waves that crash out of nowhere, waves not born in their own soul, but carried across the invisible sea of connection. These are emotional echoes, not spoken out loud, but deeply felt. It's as if the quiet person's bottled up pain, their suppressed sadness, and their unspoken longings begin to vibrate in the atmosphere, sending out energetic ripples like a stone dropped into still water. The empathic heart on the other side picks them up like a sponge soaking up a spill, absorbing what was never theirs to begin with. Imagine sitting beside someone in silence, yet feeling a weight settle in your chest, a lump rising in your throat, or a sudden shift in mood for no visible reason. That's the energetic wave moving through the room, unseen yet undeniably present. Emotions have energy, and when they are locked inside too tightly, they don't disappear. They press against the walls of the heart until they leak out in invisible streams. The silent person may appear composed, even calm, but inside, their emotions are swirling like a hurricane trapped behind glass. And if you're emotionally open, like a tuning fork ready to resonate with the nearby vibrations, you'll begin to feel it all. The sadness, the anxiety, the tension. It washes over you like perfume, sprayed from across the room. You didn't ask for it, and yet it lingers, clinging to your spirit like morning fog that won't lift. It's not possession, but connection. It's the unseen intimacy between souls that can feel each other without words. Just as a tree bends when the wind moves through, the sensitive heart bends under the weight of feelings that aren't even theirs. The silent one may say nothing, but their energy says everything. Their silence is loud, filled with all the things they've refused to cry about, speak about, or even admit to themselves. And so, the person who loves them ends up feeling like an emotional mirror, reflecting things they never experienced, but somehow deeply know. This is the language of emotional energy. It bypasses logic, ignores distance, and speaks in the quiet ways hearts understand. And unless you recognize what's happening, you may start blaming yourself for what you feel, never realizing you're holding someone else's storm in your chest. These waves are not yours, but they call you to deeper awareness, to discern, to protect your peace, and perhaps to gently help the other release what their silence can no longer contain. There are times when a person doesn't just step back, they disappear into themselves, like a turtle retreating into its shell, not out of disinterest, but because life feels too heavy to carry in the open. The one who pulled away has entered what many would call hermit mode, a quiet internal cave where they can hide from the weight of the world. But this is not the peaceful solitude of someone who seeks rest. No, this is the solitude of someone carrying invisible cargo, bags full of family struggles, financial stress, personal disappointments, and emotional wounds that never had the chance to heal. Their silence is not empty, it's crowded. Their days are filled with mental noise, like 1,000 voices whispering at once, reminding them of everything that's falling apart. They walk through life like someone moving through thick fog, trying to make sense of a path they can barely see. And even though they may still smile or nod when needed, inside they're crumbling like a house with too many broken beams. In this state, they pull away not because they don't care, but because they feel like a burden. Their emotions are tangled like a ball of yarn, and the thought of explaining any of it feels exhausting. They become a lone traveler climbing a steep hill with no map, carrying luggage that others can't see. So they isolate, not just from acquaintances, but from everyone, even the ones who love them most. The walls they build are high, not to keep others out in cruelty, but to keep themselves from falling apart in front of watching eyes. And one eye, in particular, scares them the most, the eye of the person who sees them deeply. The one who has always had a way of looking past the masks, of hearing the truth between words, of sensing when something's wrong even in silence. That kind of gaze feels too raw when your soul is aching. It feels like standing under a spotlight with all your cracks exposed. And so the hermit pulls the curtain closed. They fear being seen, not because they are guilty, but because they are tired of pretending, tired of being strong, tired of holding up a world that keeps pressing down. To be seen too deeply feels dangerous, like someone reaching into your ribcage and touching your trembling heart. Vulnerability in this state doesn't feel healing. It feels like surrendering in a battlefield where you can't afford to drop your sword. And so, they become emotionally unreachable, not because they're indifferent, but because they're overwhelmed. Their love hasn't died. It's just trapped behind doors made of fear and fatigue. They want connection, but they're scared that their mess will be too much, that their struggle will scare you away, or worse, make you pity them. So they choose silence, hoping the storm will pass, hoping they'll be able to stand again without shaking. But in doing so, they push away the very comfort they crave. They sit in their cave, burdened and aching, not realizing that sometimes the safest place to lay your burdens is in the hands of someone who sees you, not to judge, but to help carry what's crushing you. The burdened hermit hides, not because love isn't present, but because shame, stress, and self-doubt have clouded their vision. And until they feel safe enough to emerge, they'll remain behind that wall, quiet, distant, but still silently hoping someone will understand the silence without needing words. Sometimes people don't run because they don't care. They run because they care too much and feel like they don't deserve to. This individual saw the receiver through eyes of awe, not indifference. To them, the receiver seemed larger than life, someone who shined like a lighthouse in a stormy sea, someone who carried a rare kind of light that others naturally gravitated toward. In their eyes, the receiver was magnetic, powerful, graceful, a walking masterpiece, the kind of soul you don't just meet by accident. But with that admiration came a dangerous whisper in the back of their mind. I'm not enough. That whisper grew louder with every moment of closeness. It told them they couldn't match that energy, couldn't rise to the same height, couldn't possibly bring anything valuable to the table. And so, instead of leaning in, they pulled away, not out of pride, but out of deep insecurity that wrapped around their heart like thick vines, choking the courage that wanted to stay. They compared themselves to someone they had placed on a pedestal, and in that comparison, they shrunk. It's like standing beside a roaring fire and feeling like a flickering matchstick, convinced that your warmth isn't enough, that your presence is too dim. In their own eyes, they were falling short before anything even began. That inner voice, the one shaped by old wounds, past failures, and silent shame, told them that someone so radiant couldn't possibly want someone so riddled with doubt. They looked at the receiver's strength and mistook it for distance. They saw confidence and interpreted it as untouchable, and in that twisted mirror of their mind, they couldn't see the beauty of being chosen. They only saw the fear of being exposed as not good enough. It's a cruel trick insecurity plays. It turns admiration into self-abandonment. So they exited quietly, not to hurt the receiver, but to protect their fragile sense of self. They told themselves that leaving was noble, that stepping back was better than staying and being found out as lacking. It's like walking out of a treasure room because you feel like a thief who doesn't belong, even though you were invited in. They believed the receiver deserved someone with more confidence, more success, more certainty. And because they couldn't see their own worth, they assumed the receiver wouldn't either. Their pulling away was not a reflection of the receiver's value, but a painful reflection of how little they saw in themselves. And yet, what they couldn't grasp in the thick of their doubt was that the receiver wasn't looking for perfection. The connection was never about having all the answers, or matching every strength, or checking every box. It was about being real, being present, being honest. But insecurity whispered lies louder than truth. And those lies built a wall between what could have been and what was feared. So they left, not because the receiver wasn't enough, but because they believed they weren't. In truth, they weren't afraid of the receiver's greatness. They were afraid they wouldn't know how to stand beside it without disappearing. That's the ache of unworthiness. It convinces you to retreat from the very love that sees you as worthy already. And until that inner story is rewritten, even the most beautiful connection will feel like a spotlight on your cracks, instead of an invitation to heal. Sometimes people don't run because they don't care. They run because they care too much and feel like they don't deserve to. This individual saw the receiver through eyes of awe, not indifference. To them, the receiver seemed larger than life, someone who shined like a lighthouse in a stormy sea, someone who carried a rare kind of light that others naturally gravitated toward. In their eyes, the receiver was magnetic, powerful, graceful, a walking masterpiece, the kind of soul you don't just meet by accident. But with that admiration came a dangerous whisper in the back of their mind. I'm not enough. That whisper grew louder with every moment of closeness. It told them they couldn't match that energy, couldn't rise to the same height, couldn't possibly bring anything valuable to the table. And so, instead of leaning in, they pulled away, not out of pride, but out of deep insecurity that wrapped around their heart like thick vines, choking the courage that wanted to stay. They compared themselves to someone they had placed on a pedestal, and in that comparison they shrunk. It's like standing beside a roaring fire and feeling like a flickering matchstick, convinced that your warmth isn't enough, that your presence is too dim. In their own eyes, they were falling short before anything even began. That inner voice, the one shaped by old wounds, past failures, and silent shame, told them that someone so radiant couldn't possibly want someone so riddled with doubt. They looked at the receiver's strength and mistook it for distance. They saw confidence and interpreted it as untouchable. And in that twisted mirror of their mind, they couldn't see the beauty of being chosen. They only saw the fear of being exposed as not good enough. It's a cruel trick insecurity plays. It turns admiration into self-abandonment. So they exited quietly, not to hurt the receiver, but to protect their fragile sense of self. They told themselves that leaving was noble, that stepping back was better than staying and being found out as lacking. It's like walking out of a treasure room because you feel like a thief who doesn't belong, even though you were invited in. They believed the receiver deserved someone with more confidence, more success, more certainty. And because they couldn't see their own worth, they assumed the receiver wouldn't either. Their pulling away was not a reflection of the receiver's value, but a painful reflection of how little they saw in themselves. And yet, what they couldn't grasp in the thick of their doubt was that the receiver wasn't looking for perfection. The connection was never about having all the answers, or matching every strength, or checking every box. It was about being real, being present, being honest. But insecurity whispered lies louder than truth. And those lies built a wall between what could have been and what was feared. So they left, not because the receiver wasn't enough, but because they believed they weren't. In truth, they weren't afraid of the receiver's greatness. They were afraid they wouldn't know how to stand beside it without disappearing. That's the ache of unworthiness. It convinces you to retreat from the very love that sees you as worthy already. And until that inner story is rewritten, even the most beautiful connection will feel like a spotlight on your cracks instead of an invitation to heal. Sometimes the most dangerous voices aren't the ones inside our own heads, but the ones that sneak in from the outside, masked as concern, disguised as advice, wrapped in the tone of just looking out for you. This individual didn't arrive at their doubts alone. They were planted like weeds in a garden by someone else's hands. A third-party influence, a friend, a relative, maybe even someone harboring jealousy, slowly poured poison into their thoughts, drip by drip, word by word. What once felt like a promising connection began to feel suspicious under the weight of someone else's fear, envy, or judgment. The outside voice didn't shout, but it nudged. "Are you sure this is real?" People like that don't usually stay. Don't get your hopes up too high. These words, subtle as smoke, crept into their thinking and clouded their once clear view. Before long, the beauty they saw in the connection started to feel like a mirage, like something too shiny to be safe. They began to question everything. Doubt became their new lens, and love looked distorted through it. It's like being handed a cracked mirror. You look into it long enough, and even your best reflection seems flawed. The receiver, once seen as genuine and golden, began to seem too good, too kind, too available, almost suspiciously perfect. The seed of skepticism had been planted, and it grew fast, fueled by past disappointments and whispered warnings. The outside influence didn't have to say much. They just had to press the right wound, trigger the right insecurity, and watch it bloom into fear. Maybe it came from someone who had been burned by love and projected their scars. Or perhaps it was someone who envied the connection and wanted to fracture it before it fully formed. Either way, their words acted like fog on glass, making it harder and harder for this person to see the truth clearly. And so the belief settled in their chest like a stone. This is too good to be true. If I open my heart, it'll be crushed. Better to walk away before it all falls apart. They convinced themselves that retreating was wisdom, when really it was fear dressed in someone else's outfit. What once felt sacred began to feel unsafe, not because of anything the receiver did, but because another voice had altered the storyline. It's like watching a beautiful movie and then having someone whisper in your ear, "It's all fake," until you stop enjoying the moment and start searching for flaws. The worst part is, this influence didn't just create distance, it manipulated perception. It made them question what was real, convincing them that joy must always be followed by pain. That kind of thinking builds a cage around the heart and locks the door from the inside. So they pulled back, not because the connection lacked depth, but because someone else convinced them that depth was dangerous. They walked away, carrying the weight of other people's opinions, mistaking them for their own truth. And in doing so, they left behind something that could have been healing, something that could have broken old patterns instead of repeating them. They didn't see the receiver for who they truly were anymore. They saw them through borrowed fear. That's the power of outside influence. It can change the whole story without ever living a single scene. Until that voice is silenced and the person finds their own again, they will always see love through a fog someone else created. Sometimes the heart says one thing, but the mouth says nothing. And that silence, though unintentional, can feel louder than words ever could. The root of the disconnect wasn't a lack of love, but a web of miscommunication, emotional mirroring, and unsaid truths. It's like two mirrors facing each other, endlessly reflecting the same pain back and forth. Each person waiting for the other to make the first move, while time slowly builds a wall between them. The silent one still feels everything, often more than they can admit. The love hasn't vanished. It lingers like a song, stuck in the mind, playing on repeat in quiet moments. But pride, fear, and confusion have tangled themselves around their feet, keeping them from walking back to what once felt so deeply right. Instead of reaching out, they mirrored the receiver's silence, mistaking it for indifference when it was likely heartbreak. They assumed the stillness meant, "I'm fine without you," when in truth it screamed, "I'm hurting too." The miscommunication wasn't always in what was said, but in what was never spoken. Assumptions were made in place of clarity. One silence answered another, and both people stood still, trying to interpret shadows on the wall instead of turning on the light. The receiver may have reached out with softness, vulnerability, or love, but the silent one, unsure of how to respond, grew quiet, believing perhaps that their presence would cause more harm than good. And so, the emotions between them stayed suspended in midair, like unsent letters in a locked mailbox, waiting untouched but still alive. Both sides may have misread the silence as rejection when it was really protection or hesitation. They mirrored each other's emotional posture, both too bruised or uncertain to take the first step again. The connection between them wasn't shallow. It was real, rare, and deeply felt, something that doesn't come around often. But when pride enters the room, it speaks in riddles and builds fences where bridges should be. Time passes, and the longer they stay apart, the harder it feels to return. Regret begins to dress itself as logic. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. But beneath all that thinking, the feeling still flickers, soft, steady, stubborn. The silent one still carries the receiver in their quiet moments, in songs they hear, in memories that visit uninvited. They feel the ache, but don't know how to say it. Maybe they're afraid it's too late. Maybe they believe the door has closed, but the truth is, they never stopped caring. The connection didn't die, it just got buried under layers of misread signals and emotional echoes. This is the tragedy of miscommunication. It doesn't just silence truth, it creates distance where love once lived. Until someone speaks from the heart, without fear or ego, both will keep reflecting each other's silence, trapped in a loop where love is felt but never freed. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and one-time subscribe before you go.